Locker Room, with all the sports news you need, live.
Good afternoon, you lovely bunch of people in Independence Live. It is the Locker Room. It is 5 o'clock. I, as usual, am your host, Graham Duffy. Michael, again, is gallivanting somewhere. Delighted, as always, to be joined by my regular sidekick, David Smith. David, how are you this fine Friday afternoon?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Graham. Pleasure to be on with your fine self again.
Good stuff. As usual, we've got a very busy show. Now, unfortunately, David's having to leave us about 6:15, but I'm hoping to be joined by David Ferguson, and he's going to talk to us about the sad passing, which we'll get onto very shortly, of Doddie Weir, the Scottish rugby legend. I believe that David actually knew Doddie Weir, so we'll get to talk about that as well. Now, we will get on to talk about football, but firstly, David, I just want to get your thoughts on what's in Doddie Weir as well. He obviously passed away last Saturday at the age of 52 after a 6-year battle with M&D. Now, he actually managed to raise more than £8 million for M&D research, which is absolutely phenomenal. Now, I'm going to say this to David when he comes on, but the word legend gets bandied around quite a lot for a lot of folk. But I think in Doddie Weir's case, it's absolutely spot on. He was an absolute legend.
Yeah, he absolutely was. I mean, not a lot of people in Scotland in particular are quite fond with rugby. There is people that know rugby inside out. There's people that play rugby, watch rugby, support rugby, support Scotland national team and so forth whenever the rugby comes around for the Six Nations, autumn internationals or whenever the World Cup comes around. But when you ask what players come to mind when they ask about the Scotland rugby team, it's either Charles Patterson or it's Doddie Weir that springs to mind. If you ask anybody around the country who else they can think of, they struggle to write names off to you. That's the legacy that Doddie Weir had in Scottish rugby. Also, the phenomenal work, as you touched upon, that he did for charity as well, because it quite simply was phenomenal. And the fact that he's raised that amount of money for charity is some goal. And I mean, MND is a very bad disease to get, and I've known people personally that have had it, and it's not a nice thing at all. I mean, you get all different kinds of problems in the brain area, all different kind of problems with regards to mobility and coordination and balance and walking. And the Scottish rugby community was mourning over the last week, and were mourning on Saturday evening. But so was everybody else around the country as well, because Doddie Weir just didn't touch the rugby community. He touched all different kinds of levels in Scotland. He touched football. He touched obviously the general public. So the fact that Doddie Weir left such a nice feeling among us all was good to see. But a sad passing indeed last Saturday evening. And like yourself, Graham, in comparison to David Ferguson, we didn't know Doddie on a personal level, but Doddie was just an absolute legend. And as I touched upon, whenever you think about Scottish rugby, we look at players, we look at the judges and say they've been victorious, they've been historic, they've done great things in the sport, but they've nowhere near the level of Doddie Weir. And when you look at Doddie Weir, it's the one player that, if you asked me who's the best player you've seen play rugby, it'd be up there. So it's extremely sad. Thoughts and condolences went to the family at this sad time.
Yeah, 100%. I completely echo that. I mean, he played 61 times for Scotland, and he also played for the British Lions as well. Unfortunately, suffered a serious injury as well. But I mean, he's the only player still for Scotland to score 2 tries against the All Blacks. And, you know, people, whenever anyone dies, obviously it's very sad, and everyone's always talking about what a great person they were. But I think in Doddie Weir's case, that is actually very, very true. You hear the thoughts that have been talked about him. Ian McGeechan, the former British Lions coach, everyone just spoke about this massive fondness they have. And, you know, off the pitch as well, an absolute legend and a character, and on the pitch as well. And, you know, you talk about M&D, it's a horrific disease. And if you look at, I think it's down in England as well, look at Rob Burrows. He's obviously suffering with M&D as well. And you look at what Kevin Sinfield, his very good friend, has done for him. He's run 2 ultramarathons. You know, it's such a magnificent effort. And what Doddie Weir did for the Scottish game you know, it obviously is absolutely fantastic. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to get the stats here just now because he obviously played a lot, but I'm trying to get the maximum amount of times he played for Scotland. But he played 61 times for Scotland, scoring 19 points and 61 appearances. See, when you look at a footballing sense, 61 appearances is still high. It doesn't look like that lengthy, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
When you make 61 appearances in rugby, that's quite some goal because there's not as much games in rugby in a calendar year in comparison to football. And that's the thing. Doddie Weir played 61 games within a 10-year period and also a couple of games for Scotland B and Scotland A respectively. He's also done tremendous things in his rugby career as well. Played for Newcastle Falcons, played for Border Rivers, yeah. And just an absolute fantastic character, a guy that's done tremendously well for our sport, and in terms of rugby that is, and an all-round good guy. Funnily enough, we knew about Doddie, but it was 2017, sorry, when it came to light, because obviously they picked up this horrible disease. And it's actually funny because the announcement actually coincided with MND Awareness Day. So that's what that was actually quite intriguing that in every way possible. But what I found was quite good about that point is obviously in November he was accompanied by his wife to take the ball out at Murrayfield for the Scotland v New Zealand game that year in question. So that was really good. But whenever you've seen Doddie, he's always looked to find fettle. I mean, he's had his struggles. But whenever we've seen him, either on the telly or on the day of the games or the Scotland rugby games, of course, or whenever there's been anything that's came to light, he's always looked to find fettle. He's always looked to find shit, and that's the thing. That's the fear moving forward. I think for rugby players that anybody with MND that's played the sport now, I've got a lot of respect for rugby players because you have to be a lot more disciplined and resilient in rugby in comparison to other sports. But in rugby, you get the feeling now after Doddie that you might get the players that doing having the same conditions, unfortunately. But the fair play are you because they're doing a lot of work in order to rectify, obviously, what happened to Doddie. So that's obviously a good sign. But just for you guys at home there, the memorial service is going to be at Melrose. A memorial service is going to be at Melrose Parish Church on the 19th of December with audio from the service to be relayed to Melrose Rugby Football and Rugby Grounds, the Green Yards. So that's quite a good touch, of course. Another thing to mention here, Graham, is he designed his own tartan in 2018 as well, in collaboration with Scotland Shop, who are a Berwickshire-based clothes firm. And a bid to raise cash for charity that is called My Name 5 Doddie Foundation. The tartan featured colours from the teams he played for: Black Ale, Melrose, Black White Scotland. The black of the former and the white of the latter are also intended as a reference to 7 years of Newcastle Falcons. It's also registered in the Scottish Register of Tartans, reference 10047. So here's hoping that comes to, hoping that tartan or kilts or whatever have you actually become available, because I'm pretty sure they'll be getting a bit of popular demand. So yeah, extremely sad, and yeah. I hope Scottish Rugby Union remember him in the most valid way possible, the most candid way possible as well.
Yeah, I know that in Edinburgh play Munster tonight, and I know that the head coach Mike Blair said it's going to be an emotional night, and I think it absolutely will be. And we will obviously about 6 o'clock when David Ferguson comes on, we will get to Doddie Weir again, because I think he deserves more airtime as well, and hopefully somebody that knows him in Dave can shed a bit more light on Doddie Weir as a person as well. But let's now move on to the football. And I was going to talk about Rangers, and we will get to that. But I just want to talk about something that broke earlier on this afternoon from Celtic, and that was that Peter Lawwell, the former chief executive, is returning to Celtic at the start of January and he will be a non-executive chairman. Now, he spent 18 years at Celtic as a chief executive, and Celtic won 29 trophies under his leadership. Now, he did leave at the end of last summer, but Ian Bankier is retiring, so Peter Lawwell will be taking on that role. Dave, are you surprised that Peter Lawwell's come back, having only really just left?
I mean, he did think about retirement, but it was always in the offer. I mean, there was always Celtic fans, or the media were always coming out saying that Peter Lawwell was always going to come back at some stage. Now, I think just for the way things have evolved off the park for Celtic, I think it was I think it was a conclusion that Peter Lawwell was going to come back in some capacity, whether it was non-executive or indeed back in his previous role. But I don't think this appointment will go down well with Celtic, in all honesty, because when you look at this appointment, Peter Lawwell was grounded out by Celtic supporters after the failed attempt of trying to win 10 in a row because of the fact he didn't back his managers or was quite loyal to managers, in particular, like Neil Lennon at the time. And that annoyed and irked a lot of Celtic fans. And I think it's funny because Ange Postecoglou's done such a job with Celtic, and Peter Lawwell had no say in it. Yet, had Peter Lawwell had such a say, could we be looking at a totally different dynamic here? That's the $1 million question that's coming out of my lips tonight, that's for sure. But in terms of Lawwell, it's going to be an interesting It's going to be an interesting short-term period, I think, for all parties concerned, because obviously there won't be much changes on the park for Celtic as Postecoglou keep on doing the job that he continues to do and the fine work that he continues to do at Celtic Park. But what will be interesting to see is, does the manager get the same level of backing as he has been before? Does he get the same foundations? Does he get the same financial resources as what's been inherited before under previous managers? Because that's going to be an interesting one for me, because Peter Lawwell's quite simply, in my honest opinion, didn't back his managers enough. Yeah, got some very good trophies in the boardroom at Celtic Park, but at the same time, that's where the Celtic fans were very much critical. I mean, Celtic are a bit more stabilised in comparison to maybe their Glasgow rivals along the road, but just in terms of boardroom and all that kind of stuff, and obviously the Rangers AGM's next week, I think, so that'll be an interesting one. But I mean, when you look at Celtic, it's going to be interesting because Peter Lawwell has served that club. He served that club well, but the biggest attack on Celtic fans' lips was he didn't sack Neil Lennon when required in order to win 10 in a row. Had he sacked Neil Lennon in November, took in somebody and turned the corner, for example, and won the league in that season in question, I think Celtic fans would have had a completely different observation and opinion on Peter Lawwell. But the fact that he turned his mind in the club, took a year's hiatus and then came back, I don't know what the overall reaction is from Celtic fans, but because obviously I've been doing a lot of homework on this subject. But I can guarantee you, from Celtic's persuasion, that there are a lot of questions to answer. But I mean, when you look at this, I mean, there's still a lot for Celtic to go and play on. I mean, we'll touch on it later on in the show, of course, Graham, but a lot of people have been speaking about, obviously, the appointment of Michael Beale this week, and Michael Beale's been in press conferences saying that we need to win the 56 as soon as possible. That's going to be a harder job than perceived. Sorry, that's going to be a harder job than perceived, because when you look at Ange and the job he's done, it's quite simply a harder task for guys such as Michael Beale to go and win. So it's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be an interesting one to see how they get on. But when you look at this whole thing, it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Obviously, me and you aren't Celtic fans. We don't understand. Well, we do know what it means, but 10 in a row was so important for Celtic fans. Do you think that maybe, although Peter Lawwell was in charge for 18 years at Celtic, do you think the fact they didn't get that 10 in a row did tarnish his legacy a little bit?
Yeah, well, I'm actually just that's why apologies for interruption to the followers there, but that's why I was trying to get some feedback on social media in regards to what Celtic fans were saying. Um, yeah, you could argue that, but at exactly the same time, as a lot of people have touched upon, he likes to get involved in the football side of things, and that's completely against Ange Postecoglou's game. And it was completely against Brendan Rodgers' game as well. And Brendan and Ange have a lot of parallels between each other. And this is what I find extremely interesting, that Peter Lawwell's been brought in to basically sail the ship. And if I was Celtic, I'd have been looking at it I'd have been looking at it more widely. And then on the stock exchange is a massive part to play that, because Celtic are obviously part of that. And that's the interesting point as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, when you look at it, it's got mixed opinions, because there's a lot of people going to social media saying tremendous businessman who has the long-term best interests of the club at heart, fantastic appointment. But there's others saying he gets involved in the football side of things. If he does the former, he'll be back to his old. He'll be back to what people like about Peter Lawwell, and that is being resolute, being the man that can sail a big football club in Celtic to be here all the departments. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time, I think.
In terms of Ian Banker, who's resigning, I mean, what do you think his legacy will be with Celtic?
Well, I mean, a bit like Peter Lawwell, he's obviously served that club with distinction for a good while now. So in terms of Ian Bankier, he's obviously delivered a lot of success to that club. He's obviously backed his managers alongside Peter Lawwell. And the fact that it's basically one out, one in, explains us a lot of things. It tells us that it's a new chapter for the club. At exactly the same time, I think Ian Bankier can look back. I feel like Peter, prior to coming back, of course, they can both look back at their tenures and say it's successful, because if Rangers had went and won with 5 league titles and went and won 5 Scottish Cups and been competitive in Europe, and Celtic had done very little apart from being in UEFA Cup every season, you could argue and say, nah, you've not done well. But excluding Europe, I think Europe's the only black mark for both of those people, Peter Lawwell or Ian Bankier. Europe's the only black hole. I mean, you could argue Peter Lawwell under Neil Lennon, but Ian Bankier served the club for exactly the same period as well. So I think they could both look back and say the legacy is very much there. And yeah, I think it's a new chapter for Celtic now.
Sticking with the champions, a couple of bits of what I thought was quite interesting news came out as well this week. Obviously, they're looking like they're going to be signing the Canada defender Alistair Johnston in a £4 million deal, but potentially going out, and we'll talk about this man first, a man who is at the World Cup as well, Josef Juranovic, who's been linked with Man United and Atletico Madrid. Now, obviously, Johnston could be coming in to replace Juranovic. How big a loss would Juranovic be? Because I think Juranovic has been a very good player for Celtic, and he's done a very good job in the World Cup as well for Croatia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's done tremendous in the World Cup for Croatia, you're right to say that. I think he'd be a massive miss for Celtic, because Celtic quite simply have been they've been one of those sides that you look at on paper and say they're a little bit weak, but actually Juranovic and Taylor have actually really good seasons with Celtic, especially the latter, because Juranovic has been up and down the line. He's a really good defender as well. And a lot of people forget Juranovic's defensive ability, because a lot of people focus on the fact that he gets up the park a lot. I think it's just the defensive ability that gets the most points for me. It's the same with Greg Taylor. He got known for his defensive ability at the start of the season. But he's getting a little bit more forward now and scoring more goals. And I think that balance works very, very well, because it allows Juranovic to be a bit more deeper, and it allows Greg Taylor to ball more forward and get the goals he's got against like Sir Livingston and all that kind of stuff. In terms of Alistair Johnston, you were mentioning him there. I think it's a foregone conclusion. I think it's a formality, because you look at obviously Alistair, and I mean he was doing a press conference after a USA game, I think, and he was telling the press that my phone's been non-stop about Celtic suggestions and allegations and Celtic chat, which suggests to me as although there's going to be something happening, because it's not just as although fans or mates or whatever, if you are going to be contacting them, I'm pretty sure agents have been contacting them, and there's been obviously things to rubber stamp considering the Brexit implications that comes with Scottish football, fortunately. So, yeah, in terms of also Johnson, I think he'd be a good signing. Juranovic, as you say, has had a tremendous start this season, but Ange Postecoglou, I think, is looking at hit more long term because obviously Celtic had a disappointing Champions League campaign this year. They want a bit better than that. Ange Postecoglou wants better than that. He wants to use the season as a foundation for future seasons, and he's keen to use that and say we can get better as a result of this. So in terms of Ange, he's looking more at the long term, I think. If Juranovic stays, I think it's a win-win for Celtic, considering they can get extra bodies in, because that's what Ange Postecoglou's been good at so far in his tenure at Celtic. He's been good in the aspect of bringing in players, but keeping a hold of big players as well. And that's going to be key for Celtic, both in terms of this season, in terms of defending their title, but also the seasons ahead as well.
If you're Celtic, how much would you find acceptable to accept for Juranovic?
Sorry, what was that about Juranovic? Sorry.
If you're Celtic, how much would you find acceptable for Juranovic?
Probably 4 million.
Yeah, I would probably go along with that, actually, yeah. One of the other bits of news that came out, which for me was a very big surprise, is the fact that Georgios Giakoumakis could be set to leave Celtic after talks over a new and improved contract broke down. Now, he's 27 years old. He's under contract in 2026. Last season, he scored 17 goals in his debut campaign. This season, he's got 8. Obviously, he's very much behind Kyogo, who's been absolutely fantastic for Celtic. I was very surprised at this news. As I say, I'm not a Celtic fan, but I think Giakoumakis has done a very good job whenever I've seen him play for Celtic. I think he leads the line well. He's a physical presence. He's maybe not the quickest, but it doesn't really matter. You know, you put the ball in the box, he scores goals. I'm surprised. Now, I think if he does leave, it's going to leave a bit of a gap. I know that Celtic are looking at a South Korean striker, I think it is. But I think it's going to be a massive blow if they do lose him. I mean, Dave, I don't know what your thoughts are on the fact that Georgios Giakoumakis looks like he could be out the door at Celtic. Now, as I just said a minute ago, he scored 70 goals last season in his debut season. He scored 8 goals this season for Celtic. Is it a surprise that Giakoumakis could be leaving Celtic in January?
I don't think so, because I think the writing's been on the wall. But I think it's kind of hints to us that Ange Postecoglou will be looking to bring in a youth striker probably, and I think that tells us a lot, because Giakoumakis has been finding form for Celtic under Ange Postecoglou. So is Kyogo Furuhashi. The latter has been a little bit off the boil lately, but what you get with the latter is an ability to get into good areas and obviously find his way towards goals. So, excuse me, I can see. I think this tells us that Ange Postecoglou is bringing in fresh impetus, fresh players into the squad. And as I said earlier, I think it's a good thing, because you want to, the first and foremost, freshen the squad up. But secondly, as well, you want to be in a position where you are obviously getting fresh strikers out, because Rangers found that to their disposal. I think Rangers haven't exactly been proactive in that front, where exclusive Joe actually during the summer, they've relied a lot on it, like on Alfredo Morelos, and they haven't freshened it up, and obviously they've had a bit of a lull in front of goal. And this is where I find that Celtic are being a little bit proactive. That's what you usually find. You usually find that you'll get to April, May time in a summer transfer window, you'll get to November, December in a January transfer window under Ange Postecoglou, and you'll find that players are getting linked with clubs and players are linked with regards to leaving clubs. And that's just the activeness that Ange Postecoglou has. He's very proactive in what he does, he's very diligent in what he does, he's meticulous in what he does. And I think that ticks a lot of boxes as far as Celtic fans are concerned.
What do you think Giakoumakis' main strengths are? I mean, he's not the quickest, but you get the ball in the box and he will score goals. What do you think his kind of main attributes are? Is it physical presence? Is it strength? What do you think it is?
I think it is strength. I think it is physical presence as well. But also he can find the net because he's shown that time and time again since he's got a start back from the Celtic side. He's shown he can get to areas. He's shown he can get some goals under his belt, and he's shown how he can obviously find the net. So yeah, he's absolutely brilliant in terms of everything he does. With regards to his next move, I'm interested to see where he goes next. I think being England, I can see it being a club abroad. I could see it being maybe a French side, German side, Greece. Maybe we'll go back to Greece. It'll be interesting to see what happens next for him.
Yeah, definitely. Let us go to the other side of Glasgow and the worst kept secret of Scottish football. Michael Beale was appointed the new manager on Monday, signing a contract till 2026. Now, I did write a few snippets down from what he said. You mentioned a minute ago the fact that he's talked about he needs to win title 56 as soon as possible. He's also spoken about the fact he needs to give the team an identity and he needs to win games on the pitch. And one of the things that I found interesting as well, he was asked about the comments that he made when he turned down Wolves, and he said that I'm all in here and I can't be the first one to leave. He was asked about that, and he did say that when Rangers come calling, he couldn't turn that down. What did you make of his press conference? Were you impressed with what he said?
I want to touch on that last point first. I think Rangers is a totally different dynamic to Wolves. I'm sorry to tell that to Wolves, but I think Rangers is a totally different dynamic to Wolves because you're working for one of the biggest clubs in British football at Rangers. At Wolves carries an attraction. It carries a proposition. I don't think it carries the same intrigue. I don't think it carries the same magnitude as a Rangers, and that's probably because of a few things. Because Beale was familiar with the club after obviously being there as a coach under Steven Gerrard. Secondly, the club reached the final last year under Giovanni. Thirdly, probably the fact that he knows that if he does well at Rangers, he could potentially work his way into the Premier League. Now, and I think what Michael Beale is trying to do here is he's trying to not make it a shortcut. Because if he took the Wolves job in comparison to taking a Rangers job, it would be like making a shortcut into the Premier League. And then Wolves are in the precarious position right now. So you never know. Wolves could be relegated come May. What I find extremely funny, and I think this is a good reason why I think he's taking the job. QPR lost, obviously Beale and Ibrox. QPR lost at 5 in the last 6 since Beale had turned down the Wolves job. And I got the feel from the outside looking in, not from a fan base perspective, but from a footballing perspective or a Queen's Park Rangers football club perspective, that when if you was to continue that declining form and deteriorating form, and things just weren't going to progress from that perspective, you'd have had the Queen's Park Rangers fans turn on them fast. And that wouldn't have been a good look at either party, considering the fast start that Michael Beale had inherited on the club. Because that was the thing with Warburton to the extent of Loftus Road. Got off a steady start and then derailed a little bit. And I think that's Michael Beale's worry. But then, as we've seen with Giovanni Van Bronckhorst game, just 6 bad results. I mean that specifically, 6. Just 6 bad results away from becoming a bad manager, according to some at Rangers. Because that's the point. When you consider against Liverpool, it's Johnson. When you get heavily trounced against Napoli and Ajax, the writing's on the wall. And you could tell then that there was a confidence issue. And it's funny. And I find this extremely funny. Because I take a big interest in social media and what people do, what clubs do on social media. I found it very intriguing that Rangers were doing a lot of work, social media work, i.e. training ground, obviously filming their training. They didn't do that under Van Bronckhorst, especially in the latter parts of Van Bronckhorst's tenure. Because if things were steady or things were good or things were positive, they'd have been filming Van Bronckhorst's sessions like they're filming Beale's sessions since he came into the club. So there's a lot of interesting insights going on here. In terms of the winning 56, I think he's right to say that because it wins the hearts of Rangers, Rangers fans' minds. And quite simply, Rangers need reaction fast. They're 9 points behind Celtic in the title race. The game on the 2nd of January is going to be massive. But let's not forget here, Rangers have Hibs after the World Cup shutdown, and then got Doddie, and then got Ross County the Friday night. 3 tough games. As I said to you last week, before the impending arrival of Beale, if Michael Beale wins 3 out of 3, it tells you that they'll have a lot of momentum prior to going to play Celtic. Rangers were supposed to have a friendly tomorrow, and they've cancelled that because Michael Beale wants to work on things with players. And that just goes to show you he's using this World Cup break as an opportunity to stamp his authority on the players. I think it's great from Rangers. His perspective was, why did they not make the approach sooner? Because as soon as the news broke on Monday morning that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst was leaving the club, it took Rangers a direct, not until Saturday lunchtime, for Rangers to go make that approach that they were wanting Beale to speak to Beale as manager. I mean, we touched upon it with Les Ferdinand's comments, and the fact that obviously Queen's Park Rangers were going to be an open door for Michael Beale if he wanted the opportunity to go at Ibrox. And that's the thing. As much as Rangers wanted to be an open floor with regards to who they were going to appoint as manager, ultimately they wanted one target, and that was Michael Beale. And I think the biggest regret from their perspective is not appointing him far sooner than they did. So I think it's an exciting appointment. But there's a lot of people going, cheap option. It's not a cheap option because he's at a club. If he was free agent, for example, if Gary McAllister was appointed Rangers, you'd be going cheap because, quite simply, he's not at the club just now. Michael Beale is at Queen's Park Rangers. Queen's Park Rangers would have demanded some sort of fee, which wouldn't have come cheap. It'd have been hefty because Queen's Park Rangers are justified and obliged to get what they want. So, in terms of this, I think it's an exciting appointment. I think it's a show of ambition from the Rangers board because that's what they've been criticised for. And there's a lot of interest with it, going on with it, yeah.
I won't name him, but I heard a pundit last week talk about the fact that it's a bit of a worry that Rangers only ever had one target. Now, in my mind, I think that's a good thing because you've identified somebody that you want and you've gone and got them. Surely that's a good thing.
100%, because I think football nowadays is a case of statements coming out saying we're inviting applicants for such and such job. The fact that Rangers headhunted Michael Beale to be the next manager tells you something. That's what you get with big clubs, I think. You generally get scenarios that, let's say, Ange Postecoglou, I'll name a few managers, Ange Postecoglou, Steven Gerrard, Van Bronckhorst, a few managers. We've had situations where club have been linked with such and such names, such as what I mentioned there. And 9 times out of 10, the managers have come in, and then the media have kind of pinpointed them to the manager from the start, probably because of his so forth. But that's how football works. I mean, ultimately, you want to get the first possible target in. But then I get what that guy's coming from. I get where that guy's coming from as well. Because the last thing you want is you've headhunted Michael Beale to be your manager. Michael Beale turns it down, and then you go and get Joe Bloggs from the street to be your manager, and he finds out he's fourth choice for manager. Because we all know whenever a manager's fourth choice to be manager or whatever have you, the public domain will come out and say, privileged to be manager at Rangers Football Club. It's an institution within football. It's great obviously be manager of this club. But at exactly the same time as well, a lot of people are looking at that and going, I've 4 pounds for this role. And it's never a good sign. It's never a good sign at boardroom level because they've never played all their cards right to get the first, second, third choices in, for example. And it's never a good look from the manager's perspective either, because they know they're under intense pressure immediately, because they know they're not choice. So I get where the guy's coming from, but at exactly the same time, if you headhunt a guy, the guy that gets headhunted wants to roll and takes the job on, it's a win-win for all parties.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something earlier which I totally agree with, and I'm totally with you. I love social media. I'm a big fan of Twitter. Now, you mentioned something earlier that I completely agree with. I was on Twitter as well, maybe a couple of days after the appointment. And what you said about the fact that Rangers put it on Twitter, all this stuff about Michael Beale's first training session, you're absolutely spot on. They were very, very quick to show him doing the training session, showing this kind of, trying to get this quick tempo pass and all that kind of stuff. You didn't see that under Van Bronckhorst, so you are right. It was very, very different the way they worked with Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, you generally get that with all clubs, right? You generally do get that with all clubs, because the Giants are a great example of that, where obviously things didn't go well under Jack Ross. First day that Liam Fox takes training, Twitter is bombarded with, obviously, social media clips. But, I mean, I'm a big believer that unless things were deteriorating or declining, or things began to become stale internally within the dressing room at clubs, I'm a big believer that you put out footage, because it shows to me that things aren't going well. And obviously, fan engagement's a huge part of football nowadays. It has been for a long time, but it's especially big now, where if you go 4 without a win, 4 without a win isn't panic stations as such, unless it's 5-0, 4-0, 3-0, 2-0 defeats, and you've hardly done anything in front of goal. That's when it becomes a little bit panicky. Yeah, when you look at everything from a whole wide perspective, there's a lot going right with Rangers, but at exactly the same time, I think there's a feel-good factor again about Rangers, because there was a feel-good factor under Gerrard, and Beale was part of that revolution, of course. And Rangers were very, very big with regards to, obviously, when Gerrard was in charge, filming training sessions and getting them on social media and so forth. It's funny how it kind of derailed under Van Bronckhorst. Now, managers have their own requests, but I very much doubt Van Bronckhorst would have went and said, I don't want this filmed, or not that he'll have had a relationship with senior figures at clubs, but I doubt he'll have came out and says, I want this done or I want that done. So I found the whole thing extremely funny. It's funny how there's a difference in mentality, a difference in mood, a difference in attitude now.
Yeah, I mean, I've taken another couple of snippets from what he actually said. He said, we have to win every game and we have to win it in style. That's what it takes to be here at Rangers. I want to drive standards. I want the players to drive the standards once I have done it. I want to make people happy and proud of their football club. Now, I'm obviously I'm not a Rangers fan, but if I'm a Rangers fan, listen to that. I'm delighted with that. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, talk is cheap though, because they got the Gerrard came out with similar vibes whenever he got when he got the Rangers job. Gerrard came out with similar vibes when he got the job, and yeah, it was good talk at the time. The talk was cheap because Gerrard, quite simply, lost far too many big games prior to winning the 10, but quite simply Celtic collapsed, and they was under a lot of pressure from certain sections of the Rangers support, especially after big Scottish Cup defeats to Hearts, and who else did they beat by? I think it was Samir was in there as well. So yeah, talk is cheap. I think the next couple of months is pivotal for Michael Beale in terms of, first and foremost, his Premiership pursuit, the title back. Secondly, try and get a good run in the Scottish Cup. The draw was made on Monday, and they've got a tough fourth round tie away at St Johnstone. That's not going to be easy because they've picked up a lot recently. They're back to their old selves again, and that's going to be an interesting tie, because if St Johnstone can get another, not giant killer, but if St Johnstone can get another big result, it kind of knocks Rangers out and it puts Beale under pressure immediately. So I'd say from now until supper time, it's massive for Michael Beale.
Now, this wasn't scripted, but that was a great segue there from Dave, because I'm going to get off talking about Rangers, because I've spoken about that for far too long in this last 2 weeks. And I want to talk about the Scottish Cup draw. The fourth round draw was made on Monday. And for anyone who's missed it, I'm sure you've not, but I'll tell you anyway. The fourth round draw was Alloa against Falkirk, Arbroath against Motherwell, Celtic against Morton, Cove Rangers against Ayr United, Darvel against Aberdeen, which we'll get to very shortly, Dun United against University of Stirling, Elgin against Drumchapel, Hamilton against Ross County, Hibs against Hearts, gutted, Cali Thistle against Queen's Park, Kilmarnock against Dumbarton, Linlithgow Rose against Wraith Rovers, Partick Thistle against Dunfermline, St Johnstone against Rangers, St Mirren against Dundee, and Stennismuir against Livingston. I will get to Hibs against Hearts in a minute because I want to talk about that. But Dave, I firstly have to ask you, now we've spoken about this numerous times before, I love the Scottish Cup. Romance to the Cup, you get the big ties against the little teams, you get kind of David against Goliath. For me, the pick of the bunch, apart from Hibs against Hearts, is that Darvel against Aberdeen game. You got a West of Scotland side who at the moment are sitting top of the league. We spoke to Craig Menzies from Pollock last week about the standard of the West of Scotland. He said it's very high. Darvel against Aberdeen, what an absolutely fantastic tie that is. And if you're Aberdeen, it's got a bit of trepidation on that because that could be a potential banana skin if you're not professional and don't do this right.
It's dangerous for Aberdeen. Don't get me wrong. I want to give you an Aberdeen perspective on this just before I speak about Darvel. Darvel actually played an Aberdeen junior side earlier this year. Glentarra, they played a junior side up here in Aberdeen called Glentarra, and they won 11-1 or something. It was comprehensive. I'd love to. I'm pretty sure Glentarra would have been rubbing their hands. Glentarra players would have been going to work saying, I've played against them group of players. They're going to be playing Aberdeen in a few weeks' time. They're going to be listening to my support. And it's a tremendous time for Darvel. They were tremendous last Saturday against Montrose. A well-deserved 5-2 victory. Montrose were absolutely gutted at the outcome of the result. But Ross Campbell, the assistant manager, just said they weren't good enough. It's a real letdown from everybody associated with the club because Scottish Cup's big for a club like Montrose. Montrose don't spend a lot of money on players, and involved in a 4G surface, so Montrose do struggle to attract a lot of good calibre, and Stuart Peach has done a tremendous job there. So I just goes to show you the job and the magnitude the victory Darvel picked up last weekend. When the draw was making, I had a feeling that Darvel were going to get a good tie because your Celtics, your Rangers had come out. There was still some good sides in there. There was still Livingston, there was still Ayr, there was still Kilmarnock, I think. No, Kilmarnock had been out already prior to that point, but there was still Aberdeen. And I had a feeling, I was like, I think Darvel's going to get either Aberdeen or Ayr United here. And Ayr United would have been tremendous for Darvel as well, because Ayer's obviously not too far from Darvel. And the chairman was obviously BBC Scotland in the aftermath of that 1-0 victory for Ayr over Pollock at the weekend. But a tremendous tie. And Darvel are doing everything professionally by all accounts because they've got a meeting with the police and the council on Monday morning to obviously dictate how much they can get to the ground on Saturday. We'll bring up a big crowd. There's no confirmation with regards to television yet. I'm pretty sure the television will have something to say about that as well, because of course, if that's like a Sunday lunchtime or Saturday lunchtime, or it might be a bit of a struggle for Aberdeen considering travel time. There's been a lot of suggestion about the game being at Rugby Park from outlets not within Darvel Football Club, may I add, but there's been a lot of suggestion from outlets that the game came at Rugby Park. But as much as that would be a good payday for Darvel, I don't think it's right, because SFA rules persist that you should be playing your home ties at your home grounds. Because Fraserburgh got exactly the same situation when they played Rangers a few years ago as well, where Fraserburgh just at Belsley had to fit in 2,500 to 3,000 people, and Fraserburgh got some form of money from that. If you remember, Graham, obviously Fraserburgh had the scammed tickets getting scammed, which meant Fraserburgh lost out a huge chunk of money out of that as well, which wasn't ideal from their perspective. So the saving grace for them was the telly money. In terms of this one, it's a huge tie on the park, it's a tie off the park, because it is very likely going to be a telly game. And Darvel have been very, very strong at home. They've been very, very strong in the junior scene. And this is the first, I think this is the first Scottish Cup home tie. Well, first Scottish Cup home tie against a Scottish League opponent. So that's going to be a good occasion for everybody associated with the club as well. just want to. He'll go in there, he'll do all his homework in Darvel as he possibly can, and he'll try and come away with a result. But I think it's Aberdeen's first tie against no-big opposition since the 1930s or 1940s, which, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one if you're an Aberdeen fan. And yeah, Aberdeen will want to make sure they're not the receiving end of a shot, because Aberdeen are one of the biggest sides in Scottish football, and they're on the receiving end of a cup shock in correspondence. You've obviously got Hibs Hearts, you've got St Johnstone Rangers, and it would be a big thing for Scottish football if we were to see two, potentially three sides in the Premiership knocked out early on that are obviously within the top six in the Scottish Premiership. So it's going to be an interesting one. But Darvel, they'll be hoping to obviously keep the costs low. Obviously, hope to get as much people in as possible. I'm led to believe a lot of people have been touting them as 2,300 or something along those lines in terms of attendance they can hold. But I think that was COVID aligned. I think it's more 3,000 allowed. So it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. Because I think if that's the case, it'll be 1,800 Darvel, will be probably about 1,000 Aberdeen.
I've actually checked the capacity of Recreation Park in Darvel, and it was 2,200. I mean, you could probably sell that out 10 times over. But I mean, the romance of the cup, it's a magnificent tie. And from an Aberdeen point of view, there's obviously games to play before that. Now, I don't think for 1 minute that Jim Goodwin is going to take this team lightly, because I know from experience at Hearts against Borough Rangers, if you take these games lightly, you're going to get punished. So Aberdeen cannot afford to take this game lightly, and I don't think they will.
Well, it's an old football cliche here, Graham, but I think Jim Goodwin will just take it one game at a time, because he's got a busy festive period coming up. He's got games Christmas Eve, before New Year, 2nd of January. He's got 3 games within the space of 10 days. And that's going to be time consuming for a lot of the club. So they'll take distance. It's after they play, wherever they play in January, prior to playing Darvel, that that'll take a bit more precedence. I think they'll start doing a bit more homework on Darvel in January. They'll try and get as much information on them as possible. Darvel have 5 games in December, so there's plenty of time for Aberdeen scouts and Aberdeen data personnel to go and divulge into Darvel. Jim's attention and the whole thing won't exactly be coming to the forefront of his mind until probably closer to the date. So I think the scouts will be busy doing the homework just now on Darvel, knowing they've got 5 games coming up within this month, respectively. And then whenever January comes along, then a bit more attention and a bit more detail will be proposed onto Darvel from that point onwards to see where their threats lie and how they can be dangerous. But they are going to be a dangerous side, because no team goes to Links Park and scores 5 goals against Montrose if they're not a good side. And that's exactly what they are. They're a good side, and they do play the front foot. So they've got a lot of players that can probably play at Championship League 1 level here. So yeah, they're going to be a good side, and it's going to be an interesting game.
Talk about the Scottish Cup as well. I'll get to Dundee United in a second, and Hibs against Hearts as well. But obviously during the week we had Pollock. Now, we had Craig Menzies on last week from Pollock, defender. He didn't get on, unfortunately, against United. United won the game by 1-0 on Monday night. I don't know if you watched the game, Dave, but if you did, what did you make of Pollock's performance? I thought they competed very well. United, obviously, were the better side. They got the goal in the end. But I thought Pollock gave a very good account of themselves on Monday night.
Yeah, I agree. I did watch the game. I think Pollock are a resolute unit. I think they're a resilient unit. They're very, very good in the eye. They showed that understanding in the last round as well, how they can get on the front foot and take opposition team problems. And they're a strong side. And I mean, Ayr played the typical Ayr way. Wasn't pretty, wasn't excellent, but they had enough about it to get the job done. That's what Lee Billin's been good at since arriving at Somerset Park. They've been quite good in terms of being a little bit more terrestrial, being a bit more streetwise. That's exactly how they proved how they had to be Monday. As you touched upon, the Western Scotland League's a very, very good standard, and for Ayr to be finding it tough against sides such as Pollock tells you everything you need to know about the standard of obviously that league. So I think in terms of Ayr, they obviously found it very, very tough, and it was never going to be an easy game by any stretch. But as Lee Ballin touched upon post-match to the BBC, it was just about getting through the next round. That's exactly what Ayr achieved. They weren't They weren't excellent, but they showed a bit of resilience, got the goal, and then the traditional air thing, sat back. It's a traditional rebuilding thing. Get every player behind the ball possible, try and combat Pollock's pressure, and that's exactly what they did. And then in the next round to go, and they've got a tough tie away to Cove Rangers now.
Yeah, their star man Akinyemi had a couple of chances, but I thought Pollock dealt with them pretty well.
Yeah, but I kind of touched upon this to yourself when speaking about air recently. I think when Akinyemi has an off night, or a lot of defenders put a lot of authority on Akinyemi, it allows a lot of other players to get a lot bit more freedom. Because Brad Spencer, I thought, got a lot of joy in terms of getting into good areas because he was kind of the spare man in the air team. And Brad Spencer got a lot of joy in terms of getting into good areas and getting into good holes, and obviously take his goal very, very well. When guys such as Akademi have a quiet night, it's not as though Ayr are going to be find themselves isolated and stuck. They've got other players where they can rely on as well, and that's how it proved to be on Monday, of course.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about Hibs and Hearts in a minute, don't worry. But I want to talk about University of Stirling, who have a trip to Tannadice. What a great draw that is for them, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what a fantastic victory, first and foremost, away to Rovers at the weekend, because for them going to be a League Two opponent is some going. I mean, University still have all the credentials, all the capabilities in order to go and do it, but and Albion Rovers aren't exactly doing very, very well just now. But Brian Reid's been working miracles at that club. And Albion Rovers, I think they'll have looked at that draw and they'll be absolutely gutted, because they'd have been wanting a Premiership side and an opportunity to get some much needed income into them, because they've been well documented in saying they've got one of the lowest budgets in League Two, and they've probably got far deeper budgets in comparison to sides the Lowland League, the West of Scotland setup, and that's what Albion Rovers are up against, unfortunately. But as for University of Stirling, tremendous win, and tremendous celebrations in the dressing room after the game. Good songs getting sung. There was a video by the goalkeeping coach at Stirling University, which attracted at least 12,000 views. And yeah, when you look at obviously Stirling, they had a strong victory. And off to Tannadice to go. And yeah, I'd be confident if I was Stirling. I think Dundee love too much, but Dundee don't exactly do well just now. And Dundee will have other priorities on their mind if things don't take a turn for the best. There's a lot of massive games in here. They've obviously got relegation deciders, relegation six-pointers, either this side of the year or in the early part of next year. And in terms of University of Stirling, they'll get much needed income from this, because Chris Geddes touched upon it, the University of Stirling manager. These players don't get paid money, and there's some players that come in through scholarship programmes, and these scholarship programmes will be a hefty fee for University of Stirling to implement and obviously put in place. So they'll get some much needed income from the game, and that will obviously help them in terms of moving forward. And obviously they'll have a lot of fourth year students down the way to move on, so they'll obviously get to the end of the season. They'll also do very, very well. There's been a lot of chat with regards to Lowland League, and obviously Rangers, Celtic and Hearts being in the league, but University of Stirling are currently second in that league. And if Rangers were to win the league and University of Stirling was to finish second, University of Stirling would be having that playoff against whoever wins the Highland League. So University of Stirling are having a strong show-season in every capacity possible. They've shown it in the weekend game. They've shown they can beat a Scottish League opponent, which means that if this was not to happen in terms of University of Stirling getting up to the Scottish League, they've every capability and every credential to go and do it.
Would the only slight downside be that Tannadice might not be that busy?
Yeah, that made me know. I mean, Dundee will lower the price, because I'll be surprised if it's much more than £15. But yeah, I think the only thing is, if that was like an Aberdeen, for example, Aberdeen would have been probably 6,000 to 8,000, which would have meant the club would have gone still in the region of 30 grand or 15 grand, something along those lines. I'm not exactly 100% doing the maths. The giant will only probably attract about 3,000. The atmosphere won't exactly be electric in that day in question. And I still think University still all. I think if University still were to attract a 5-figure fee, I think that'd be a good day for them overall.
Yeah, fantastic for University still. Hopefully they can manage to pull off a shock. You never know. But let's get to it. Let's get to the big tie. Hibs against Hearts. Now, come the end of this game, this will be the 10th time since 2000 that Hibs and Hearts have met in the Scottish Cup. I'm not going to lie. I was gutted when that draw came out. It's not the draw that I wanted. I wanted to avoid Celtic, Rangers, and I didn't want a derby. I wanted something slightly different. I wanted, say, an Elgin or a Darvel, something just a bit different. But it is a derby. Listen, derby games can go either way, but it is a cup game. It's at Easter Road. Hibs, not particularly great just now. Hearts, for me, on paper, have a better squad. Dave, what's your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, excited end of the derby. And as I touched upon, there's going to be one big side out early doors in the Scottish Cup. There's going to be either a heartache for Hibs or heartache for Hearts. And it's going to be an interesting one. If you were to look at the two sides just now, who I think will come out on top, form's going to be form will go out the window for this game at exactly the same time. Form could take a different complexion by the time we come to this game on the 20th of January, or just after that. Sorry, if you were to ask me who's going to win based on form, it'll be Hearts, because Hearts have the corner whilst Hibs are deteriorated, and it's a steep decline or steep incline of events for both those clubs at this precise moment in time. So it's going to be an interesting one. The fact it's Easter Road is interesting, but then it's obviously been well documented that Martin Boyle is unavailable for Hibs just now, and it's going to be interesting to see whenever we come back to the Premiership and the domestic scene a fortnight what Hibs do, because as I've touched upon, it's been well documented. Whenever Hibs don't have a Martin Boyle or a distinctive attacker leading the forward line, Hibs always find themselves isolated, and that's going to be the interesting concept for me to see how Hibs evolve, how Hibs adapt, and how Hibs cooperate in comparison to that. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be interesting to see how they get on, and yeah, when you look at that, there's obviously it's going to be interesting to see how they get on. So yeah, it's going to be interesting and intriguing. I think Hearts will win, but it's going to be interesting.
The slight concern for me, now I did know this, I didn't have to test myself out on this, I did know this. The slight concern for me is the fact that Robbie Neilson has never won a derby at Easter Road. Now, his record against Hibs has not been great, it's been well documented. He should have won the derby earlier this season when we were 1-0 up at Easter Road. Lauren Shanklin scored in his debut. We couldn't hold on, obviously. Martin Boyle scores, which I knew he would. Absolutely guaranteed that was going to happen. So Robbie's record at Easter Road is not great. Now, already, again, somebody actually mentioned this on Twitter earlier on, I noticed. And I do agree with them, actually. They did say that if Robbie Neilson was to lose, because there's 2 games in January, Hibs against Hearts. They played at Tynecastle on the 2nd of January, and they played the Cup game on the 21st, 22nd of January. And one of the Hearts fans said that if Hearts lose either one of these games, there'll be Robbie out protest or banners. I agree with that. I've already said that. I think Robbie is only ever one defeat away from people saying they should be sacked. I mean, Dave, how important is this, especially the Cup game, going to be for Robbie Neilson? Because I've just mentioned there, Robbie has never won a derby. Robbie's never won a derby at Easter Road as a manager before. So how important will this game be for Robbie?
Well, I didn't actually realise that start, to be honest with you, game. So that just goes to show you how big this game is for Hearts. Also, if Robbie Neilson can get the monkey off his back in terms of winning a derby at Easter Road, it would kind of settle the Hearts fans down a little bit. Again, I think because obviously he's been getting some criticism from the Hearts supporters after the European run and so forth. So when you look at all things considered, if he can go Easter Road and get the job done and get some result of some magnitude, there'd be some going, and it would obviously help in terms of alleviating the current unrest among Hearts supporters at Easter Road.
Absolutely. And 6 o'clock. I'm delighted to say that we are joined by David Ferguson. We are going to talk about Doddie Weir very shortly. David, how are you getting on, son?
Yeah, I'm good, Graham. Good. How are you? How's Dave?
Not too bad, mate. Not too bad. Oh, I think Dave might have just left us. He was having to leave at quarter. Oh, he's back. I can't tell what's happening here. He's disappeared. He's back. Before we go to talk about Doddie Weir,
Apologies, David. Hope you're well.
Yeah, good, guys. I'm sorry I've missed out in the early chat from 5 o'clock, but a lot going on today. But good to join you now. Delighted to be here.
Good stuff. We are going to talk about Doddie Weir very, very shortly. I did mention at the start of the show, but I just want to touch on with yourself, Dave, at the moment. We'll talk about the Scottish Cup draw. We've spoke already about the fact that Darvel play Aberdeen. I'm just talking about the fact that Hibs play Hearts, which I'm gutted about. It's a good draw I didn't want. Is there any particular draw that stands out for you when you saw it in the fourth round?
Well, of course, looking at my own team, St Mirren, we've got a draw with Dundee at home. You never quite know how to take things. To play against teams below you. For St Mirren, we can go out to anybody, probably. In terms of, you look back to our performance at the start of the season in the Doddie Cup, really, we were losing and drawing all over the place and really struggling. So, it's good to have a bit of Scottish Cup excitement, I think, to come. I couldn't believe it when I saw Hibs and Hearts being drawn out. I'm sure Hibs and Hearts fans, I'm sure you were saying, here we go, I expected it. But it's unbelievable to get a draw like that again. Somebody, is it 6 times in 7 years? Something, is that right? The Hibs and Hearts have met in the Scottish Cup 6 times in the last 7 years. I think that's phenomenal. But yeah, I mean, there's some good draws. I mean, it's great I always love to see the teams that are, teams from the lower leagues that are in the Scottish Cup. I think it's a fantastic thing. I started off my football career. Not really, because I didn't have a football career, but I played at Gallifreydine when I was in my teens and late teens. And Gallifreydine absolutely lived for a Scottish Cup draw and the chance to get into the third round, as it was then, fourth round. And so for these teams coming through, it's a huge day for the likes of Darvel and who else is there? Both out. But it's huge for these clubs to get the chance to have a giant killing. That's what we want to see, so long as it's not our club that's been the giant that's killed. It's great to see, these smaller clubs. So I really look forward to them. I look forward to seeing how they're doing. And you just hope sometimes it's great to go to another place. I know St Mirren fans particularly love hitting the road and going to places not been to before. So I quite enjoy that as well. This time it won't be, we're at home to Dundee. But I'm looking forward to seeing the lower league clubs or the clubs that are not in the league and seeing how they do, and always looking for a giant killing somewhere, to be honest, Graham.
David, you must be delighted with how St Mirren have done so far this season. I mean, we spoke months and months ago about the fact that Robinson was under a bit of pressure, hadn't done well in the League Cup. Obviously, they got beat 4-1 by Aberdeen, but since then they've had a great run. They obviously beat Celtic. They had a very decent result against Rangers. You must be delighted with how they've played. And for me, and I mentioned this to Dave actually a couple of weeks ago, one of the surprises for me has been Curtis Main's form. I think he's been very impressive.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually been great to see. I'm delighted for Curtis Main because he struggled when he came in, and he's not necessarily he's not a penalty box scorer, as such. He's a big guy. We know what he brings. He can be physical. He's hard to get off the ball. But it was a real difficulty for St Mirren. I was going to say last season, but it has been for a number of seasons, trying to get two strikers that will work off each other and play with each other and put each other in. You tend to often get two strikers doing the same thing, two guys holding the ball up, or you've got two guys who are in behind and we've got nobody holding the ball up. And it's been really difficult. St Mirren have had a really competitive side for a good number of years now, but we haven't been able to score regularly. And I really like the look of Jonah Ayunga when I saw him sign. He looked quite good in pre-season, ironically, when everybody else was looking poor. But I would agree. It's been good to see Curtis Main come on a game where he's getting confidence, he's scoring goals, and it's funny, isn't it? You talk about you talk about strikers needing to score and getting so many goals, and you think, well, that's not what it's all about. There's more to the game than that. but you see a difference in them when they do score. You know, they put pressure on themselves, you know, to score. And when they're not scoring, they don't go for shots. They don't try and get on end of things. They pass the ball away rather than take it on themselves. Whereas what we've seen with Curtis in the last month or so when we were playing was he was taking things on. He hit a cracking shot, hit the bar in the last game we were at. You know, he had a couple of other shots. And he wasn't doing that last season because he was struggling for the confidence. So, yeah, delighted. I think one of the stars for us has been Keanu Bacchus, you know, and we're delighted that he's off with Australia away at the World Cup, not only because we get £10,000 a day or a share in that every day that he's away at the World Cup, but of course that's the first ever St Mirren player that's been at the World Cup while he's been at St Mirren. So we're pleased with that. Disappointed for Ryan Strain, our fullback from Australia. He's been great for us this season as well. I thought he might have been there, but managers' whole careers can be, and periods with a club can be decided on signing sometimes. And Jim Goodwin struggled to get the strikers in, and in his time, that was the one thing he struggled with and really didn't get right, was getting strikers who could score goals for us. I think Stephen Robinson has done that, but he's also found somebody in Keanu Bacchus who we needed, a midfielder who's box to box, a midfielder who gets about, puts pressure on opposition players, and he can tee people up, he sets people up. He must have had, I don't know how many assists, but you know, I wouldn't be surprised if he's created at least 10 or 12 goals for us this season with his play.
Well, I have been back in the Socceroos because there's 3 Hearts players in that team. Kyle Rowles,
yeah, of course.
Kyle Rowles has been brilliant so far. Devlin, who's not got on yet, and Atkinson, who played the first game but he's been injured. Obviously, tomorrow they play Argentina. I'm hoping they go through, but it's going to be tough against our Lionel Messi-inspired Argentina. But yeah, I mean, you've mentioned Bacchus there. I think he's been fantastic, not just for Australia, but for St Mirren as well. And I think this World Cup, for me, Australia, I'm not just saying this because you're hearing, you've got obviously Bacchus in the team and we've got 3 Hearts players in it. I think Australia, along with Japan, have been probably the 2 biggest surprises for me in the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I don't quite know what to make of Australia, but the interesting thing is Argentina, for all the quality that Argentina have got in that team, they just struggle to bring it together as a team. It's not easy to do that. You know, lots of individuals used to playing different formations with their clubs, used to dominating in their clubs, because half of that Argentina team will be the best players in the teams they play for. And then they come together. And I remember a number of years ago, I was on a tour to Argentina with Scotland Rugby, reporting for the Scotsman. And we took time out on that tour to go and watch Ecuador against Argentina. So they were playing in a World Cup qualifying the time we were there. And we went, obviously, to watch Messi. We were delighted to be able to go along and watch Messi in the River Plate Stadium. Great experience. But Argentina were absolutely rank, and Ecuador beat them 1-0. And for the life of me now, I'm trying to remember what his name is. The name's going out of my head, but it was a Hibs striker that scored for Ecuador. Can you remember, Graham? Ecuadorian Hibs striker.
I've got
Hibs at the time.
I've got a feeling it might be Hurtado, possibly. I think his name might be Hurtado.
Was it? That name doesn't ring a bell. I'm just, while I'm here, see if I can remember who that was. But it might have been Hurtado, was it? Yeah, could have been. Or Ulises de la Cruz, was it?
I think he was at Hibs, yeah.
I think it might be him. He scored. So he scored against, I think it was De La Cruz. He scored against Argentina. Messi hardly touched the ball or did hardly anything with it. And, you know, after that game, I remember coming back and watching Argentina often and regularly been disappointed in them. And so I actually think Australia have got a chance. I think Argentina are for favourites. They should win the game. They've got all the quality. But I think Australia, if they go at them and play the way they've been playing, I think it could be a phenomenal result for these Scots that are in that team, you know, going up against Messi and Argentina. I think they could surprise still.
Yeah, I think Dave Smith, I mean, it's, for me, as a Scottish football fan, I think it's great to see so many Scottish-based players doing so well at World Cup. How good is it for the Scottish game that we're seeing all these players playing at this World Cup and playing very well?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing for Scottish football because you beforehand we've seen players go to the World Cup that have been with Rangers and Celtic, and they've just been with those sides realistically. they had been for playing for an Aberdeen, Hibs, or Hearts, and so forth. But now you're seeing players from Dundee getting called up, St Mirren getting called, Hibs getting called up, and not Aberdeen this time around, but players from so-called smaller clubs in comparison to Celtic and Rangers who and players again because they're doing very, very well in Scottish football. And I think it's going to be a good thing for Scottish football. Here's hoping by the time the players come back to the home, to obviously Scotland, that they're coming back fire and ready to go. And showing that they've had a good standard at the World Cup. Alongside that, showing that they've learned a lot from the World Cup, they can take it to their clubs. Pardon me, by the time we start to action.
Yeah, definitely. I'll get back talking about football very, very shortly, but we've brought David Ferguson on really to talk about the man, the legend for me I spoke about at the start of the show, Doddie Weir. Obviously, we had the sad passing last week, David, of the fact that Doddie at 52 passed away. Now, he raised £8 million for M&D research, which is absolutely phenomenal what he did. 61 caps for Scotland. He played for the British Lions, but unfortunately, injury kind of curtailed that a little bit. I said to David earlier on that the word legend gets bandied about quite a lot for different people, whether it's Messi, Ronaldo, whatever you want to say. But for me, Doddie Weir was an absolute legend of not just Scottish rugby, but just in general. He was just a legend in general.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, Doddie, I'm fortunate enough to know Doddie. I've known Doddie a long time, since he was sort of late teens, early 20s. And, he'll be up there quite bemused, laughing his head off at people saying, he's a legend, comparing him with other sporting greats, and he always laughed, when anybody ever tried to suggest that to him. And even recently, even when people were saying to him, what you've achieved with MND is phenomenal, he would just laugh it off and say, other people would have done the same, and I'm just done the best I can, that's all. I'm just a daft laddie from the borders, I'm just a daft farmer. He maintained that all the way through, and I think that's what sort of made him so personable to anybody. I don't think there can be anybody I've come across anyway who has as many friends and had as many friends. How they're going to cope with that church for the funeral, on the 19th of December. I know that they're going to hold, it's going to be in Melrose in the Greenyards. They're going to have sort of overflow in there, and they're going to transmit the service. But, wherever Doddie went in the world, he made friends very easily, very quickly. And because he was a genuine guy, and he told jokes, he laughed about Scottish rugby, he laughed about Scotland, he would talk about anything. He was friendly with Alan McCoy, talking about football. He could cross over boundaries of sport and life and work. He had a big following in the farming world, a lot of friends there. The equestrian world, believe it or not, the height he was. He straddled a horse, where I think his feet were often on the ground, but he was, a great horse rider. He was well known. Some of the pictures and the memories that people have been sharing over the past week of things he did. There were big pictures I saw during the week of him as chair of a local scout troop and turning up regularly to motivate the kids at the scouts and talk to them. And all the time, what he imparted to people all the time was just to live life, to the full, just to make the most of what you've got. And he was doing that before MND came along. Of course, MND is tragic, and I think it's a testament to Doddie that now many more people know about MND, know what it is, know that it needs research. And I think it's testament to his type of character that is raised. You mentioned about 8 million or so. I think the reality, to be honest, Graham, is that fund is now over 10 million, and they've given between 1 million, 2 million to people suffering with MND as well. He was really strong, Doddie, on research is really important, but we need to help people while they're here and help improve their lives. And so there's quite a bit of money gone to that as well on top of the research. But yeah, you've seen all the character that I never saw on a pitch because I never played in the pitch with him, but teammates talk about that he had a real fierce desire within him. When he was on the pitch, it was hard to stop. We've seen that manifest itself for the benefit of MND research.
Yeah, well, I took a few notes before I came on the show tonight, and Ian McGeechan, who was a British and Irish Lions coach when he basically gave Doddie Weir his debut for the Lions. He called him an unbelievable character. And you've got Gregor Townsend, the Scottish coach just now, and a teammate said he was a brilliant teammate. You know, he was a championship winner with Melrose and Newcastle. He was one of these guys that I think would light up a room. And I think you've mentioned it there, that up there he'll be sitting laughing away. But, you know, whenever anyone dies, you always see people say what a great character and all that people were. And it is always, you know, it's always true. But in Doddie Weir's case, it really was. I mean, I like rugby. I'm not, you know, I'm more a football fan, but I do like rugby. But Doddie Weir was Doddie Weir was one of these guys that you look at and just think, he's the guy I would like to go for a drink in the pub. He's one of these guys that I would love to get to know. Just a character, really.
And I think I tell you what's funny is you hear that quite a lot, don't you? You have people ask you, who would you be 3 people you take to dinner and all the rest, and if you could, who would you have? And you're never quite sure if people's public persona is the same as what they'd be like privately. And the thing about Doddie was, it absolutely was. So there was no doubt if you went out for a night with Doddie to celebrate something, to have a party, to have a laugh, it was always going to be entertaining and going to be fun. And that's what his family and friends will miss more than anything is, you know, everything he's been doing for MND. He talked a lot to people around about him. He's been talking for years about how this must continue. This wasn't about Doddie Weir, and he didn't want it to be just about Doddie Weir or helping Doddie Weir. He never wanted that from the beginning. He wanted it to be about MND research and improving things. And some element of that a lot of people won't realise, I think a lot of people will probably think that Doddie, because he was so friendly, he was so well known in rugby, and he had lots of contacts, people will probably think that's how he generated the support for MND and for research. It's not as simple as that. There's been lots of people who've tried to build up support for MND over the years. I've learned a lot about that in recent years, and haven't managed to. And one of the reasons is, I remember meeting Doddie early on when he got MND, and he came out and spoke about it and was public about it. And I met him for a coffee, I remember, and he just had a meeting with some consultants, and he was saying he was absolutely livid. We were sitting having his coffee, and he couldn't drink it because he was angry. And he was sitting saying, "You wouldn't believe what they're saying, what they've said to me, David. You know, they've said that there's no hope. That, you know, there's nothing that's going to save me. Obviously, that's the way it is. There's no treatment. So there's a pill they'll give you to make things better, to make things more comfortable. Perhaps it's been given for 20 years. They're not really sure whether it works or doesn't work, but that's all they've got." And he said, everybody I've spoken to so far in the medical world has been just negative and no positivity at all. Now I understand they've got to be real about it, and you know, its reality is this is you've got to plan for your death, you've got to plan for going. So I get that, but he said, you know, I can't believe that nobody seems to be really trying to make a difference, change this, and do some research. And part of that motivation also came from him learning early on that it's not that they can't find a cure for MND, like many illnesses. It's that they haven't researched it enough yet. So the medics were saying to him, on one hand, there's nothing we can do for you. On another hand, they were saying, oh, well, if I had the money to do the research, and if we could do X amount of research, we're pretty confident we would find a cure. And for Doddie, that just did not compute. Doddie was going, hold on a minute. All you're saying is we haven't done enough research to actually find a cure. Now, obviously, they don't know how much research you have to do, how long it would take, but they said, yeah, there's not been the money. Money goes to cancer, it goes to other things because they're well-known illnesses. We don't get it in MND. So that was the starting point for Doddie to say, right, in the time I've got left on this earth, I'm going to make a difference to that. And I'm going to, you know, kick down doors, walls, whatever it takes to get people to take this more seriously, to put money into MND research, and to give us a chance. It won't be for me probably in my lifetime, but give the chance for people with MND over the next 10 to 20 years to have some hope, to actually be able to be spoken to with some optimism, where people can say, okay, we know now how to make your life a bit better. We know now how to delay the onset. And ultimately, we know now how to cure it. Now, that was what he then devoted his life to, and nobody could get in his way. He had some horrendous arguments with people who said, you're not going to make anything, you're not going to do anything different, Doddie, you're not going to change it, just accept where you are. He had some horrendous times where he said, that's just nonsense, we're not having that. And he fell out with a few organisations. It led to him creating the MND Foundation himself, where he said, right, I've got control of this, I can do what we want to do. And, people call him a force of nature, and that's what he was. He went to medics, he went to government, he went to parliament and said, this has to change. And, one of his greatest achievements was persuading Boris Johnson and the UK government to put aside £50 million for MND research. And that took a lot of work, and that took Doddie actually presenting his friendly side and the fact and using his fame and what have you to get those meetings, but also took the hard edge and the sharp tongue of Doddie, where he left those politicians in no doubt that if they didn't follow through with this, he'd be coming back for them. And, he wasn't going to let it drop. And that, I think, is probably people are not as aware of, that it was that desire from his playing career and what took him to the top of rugby, that desire to be the best that he could be. That's what he's shown in the last few years. A couple of times him and other friends have said to him, got to be careful, Doddie, with how you speak to somebody like that. You're wanting to work with him. And he said, no, I don't have to be careful. I'm not going to be here for much longer. I don't have any time to be diplomatic, to be nice, to be careful about it. Things have to happen now. And that's what actually made people stop and turn and change. And that's why we're talking about 10 plus million that he's raised and 50 million coming from UK government, that hopefully will start to give people with MND hope in the future.
Great to see Red Scotland in the chat here. I'm going to put this question to you, actually, David. Red Scotland has asked, is there any links with MND and intensive sport?
Yeah, I mean, there have now been, Dr. Willie Stewart, who many people have heard talking about concussion. He's been doing a lot of research on concussion and the early onset dementia, linking concussion with early onset dementia. And a report came out earlier this year that linked it to, that suggested that those playing rugby and high-level sport are more likely to have MND. I think the stunning statistic that Willie came out with only 2 or 3 months ago was 14 times more likely to have MND if you're a top-level rugby player. Now, obviously, that was a stunning quote, not a nice thing to see. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done on those links and firming that up and providing the evidence that links it and looking at what else could be causing that. It might not just be the sport, of course, there might be other things going on. But I think they're starting to make connections there, which, you have to say are worrying for sport. But also, as we've seen this week, Graham, Scottish football have acted on that concussion research and said, okay, let's stop heading the ball the day before and the day after a game. If it can help, if that kind of research and science can help us practice differently and do things differently to avoid people developing these kinds of illnesses later on, then it has to be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, you've only got to look at, you talk about rugby, you talk about Doddie Weir, you've only got to look, and I mentioned this to Dave earlier, if you look at England and you've got Rob Burrows, you look at what his pal Kevin Sinfield has done. He's run 2 ultra marathons to raise funds for M&D. The fact that Doddie Weir has basically battled this for 6 years and he still kind of maintained that kind of humour, he still kind of maintained that kind of that character about him, speaks volumes about the man himself. We're 2 able-bodied guys. I've got no idea what living with M&D must be like. It must be horrendous. It's a horrible, horrible disease. And the fact that he's had this for 6 years, the fact that Rob Burrows has still got it just now, I can't even begin to compute how hard that must be, not just for Doddie Weir, for Rob Burrows, but for the families as well.
Yeah. I think, and I think that's a really important point, Graham, is everybody's talking about Doddie in this and understandably what he's been through, what his wife Kath has been through with it. She deserves a medal for how she has. Doddie does what he does, and as I say, he's been a force of nature. He said, "I'm not going to be here for a long time. I know that, so I'm just going to batter on and do this." Kathy's been by his side, having to go through that, having to help him there physically, but also mentally, having to cope when he's shattered. He pushed himself way beyond what doctors said he should be doing at times, because he said, I don't care. I need to go there Saturday. I can't wait. The event doesn't happen next week. I can't have a week's rest. I'm doing it now. I'm going to be gone soon. I've got to do as much as I can. So Cathy and his three sons, Hamish, Angus and Ben, they were taken along in the slipstream of that. But they wanted it. They went for that. There's huge supports to their dad. Cathy was a massive support to Doddie. And you're right, we can only imagine, how difficult that was behind closed doors. There was a lot of adaptations had to be made to Doddie's house. He was quite adamant, and again, he fought with some of his own trustees early on, because they said, we want a fund for you, Doddie, to look after you, and that's the important thing at the moment. He said, no, the fund has to go to research. And they said, well, we've got to have some of it for you. He didn't want any of it at the beginning, and he said, look, I'm not wealthy, I'm not a rich man, I'm a farmer, but I've had a bit put away from my rugby career at the end. He didn't, most of his career was as an amateur, but he made a bit at the end. And he said, so I don't want money. But they had to impress upon him how his life would change, and the need that the family would have to adapt the house, to have different type of wheelchair, electronic wheelchair that would help him. So he was forced to accept some of the fund going to look after him, on the proviso, he said, that it goes to other people in Scotland that are suffering with MND as well. But yeah, I mean, Cathy and the boys have just been immense, absolutely immense, in how they've supported him all the way through it. And, it's a real support, I think, also for other people with MND in Scotland. I think, the hope now is that we don't, you will inevitably lose some of that momentum because Doddie's gone, but it's other people stepping up and taking it on. And he's inspired a lot of people to do that. And I think any sufferer with MND out there who steps up and says, I need some help, my family needs some help, we want to do something to help here, will get a lot of backing in Scotland now, an awful lot more now than perhaps they might have got before. So, I think that would make Doddie feel pleased that he's achieved something. And I think there'll be lots of people around to support Doddie's family as they move forward, and the three boys that want to take on his legacy.
This is a great question by Red Scotland, actually. A good point is made here. With football, we have the heading ball as a major red flag. Does the scrum in rugby, therefore, cause similar head injuries that later lead to conditions such as MND? Because if you watch these guys going to scrums with their heads, they go in full pelt.
Well, they don't so much. They did used to, Graham, 20, 30 years ago. They would stand back, they take a step back, and then they go at each other full pelt. It's supposed to, there have been a lot of changes made to the scrum, believe it or not, in the last 10, 15 years to try and make it safer. So I'm not sure. I haven't seen the science to explain. I haven't seen the links between scrummaging injuries and any dementia or any MND or other situations yet. A lot of the work they've done in rugby has been focusing on concussion sustained in, which often is in tackles. There are some quite a bit sustained in the ruck, so players been driven off rucks and hit in rucks. They still say it's tackles that are most often that cause it, and particularly, as a young boy, when you're taught to tackle in rugby, the first thing they do is tell you to put your head on the right side of the body, so that right side of the legs, so you don't get the legs coming through your head. But you see, the way tackling has gone in the last 20 years, players put their heads in front of knees and thighs all the time. And whereas you might have got away with it 10, 15 years ago, if you've got a guy that's 19, 20 stone running at you and he's athletic, he's lifting his legs, he knows what he's doing, he can evade. Forwards didn't do that. I can imagine forwards shouting at me. I can hear them now. But 20, 30 years ago, we didn't have many forwards that were 19, 20 stone, athletic, very fit and running full pelt. They are now. And there are wingers like that now. So it's a dangerous game. I haven't seen any science to say that the scrum is causing head injuries, but I definitely know that the pressure and the power that goes on the front of the scrum, I think myself and a colleague looked at that 10, 15 years ago, and it was equivalent to a ton, the front row in a scrum taking a ton of weight coming at you in a scrum. That was worked out. That's what the forces were like. Now, there are certain members of that front row in a scrum, particularly the tight head prop, who has two players coming at him, as opposed to the loose head who gets to hang out on the side. So the pressure on a tight head prop is pretty phenomenal. And if you go into a gym of a rugby club and watch these tight heads training, an awful lot of them are standing lifting weights with their neck. They put a weight around their neck and they're lifting weights. So their necks get wider and wider, stronger and stronger. They need to do that to be able to cope with the physical stress and the power coming at them now in the scrum. But I do wonder about what that's doing to their bodies. You know, they're pumping themselves up so they can cope, and then they go to somebody else who has to do that on the other side. You know, yeah, I do worry. What I'm saying is I don't think there's any evidence at the moment. I've not seen any evidence to say that these illnesses are being caused by scrummaging, but it's really important that Willie Stewart and others are allowed to continue and are supported to continue research, because rugby has to do more, in my opinion, to make the sport safer.
I completely agree. I mean, just touching on Doddie's career, he made his first Scotland appearance against Argentina in 1990. He was selected as part of the British and Irish Lions tour in South Africa in 1997, but he suffered a very serious knee injury. He made his final Scotland appearance was in the Six Nations against France at Murrayfield in March 2000. And he's still, to this day, I believe, the only Scot to have scored 2 tries against New Zealand, which is incredible, really. I mean, when you think about it, against a fantastic New Zealand side, he had a fantastic career. And I think for me, had he not had that injury, he would have played a lot more games for the Lions, because he was a great player.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, he never believed he was the best player going, never believed he was the best player in the world. And even when he was picked in the British Lions squad, his initial reaction was to laugh about it and say, how am I going to go out there with all these great guys, Lawrence Dallaglio, who he always called Dallaglio, and Martin Johnson and these guys, you know. And it was interesting because there was a lot of thought at the time when you saw the quality of guys. Simon Shaw was another that was there from a second row from England, and Martin Johnson and Simon Shaw went in together about third or fourth game into that tour, and it looked like that was the Lions team. Now, unfortunately, Doddie was injured, but the first Test Lions team was not anything like what the team would have looked like at the beginning of the tour. And even Ian McGeechan and Jim Telfer admitted that if they'd written down the team at the start of the tour, it wouldn't have been the same team they picked in the first test, what they thought it would be. So you had Tom Smith, who came through, Paul Wallace, who came through the front rows. They weren't expected. Tom Smith had only played, I think, 6 games for Scotland before going on the Lions tour. He was taken as an outsider, but he impressed. And Doddie was one who Jim Telfer and Ian McGeechan admitted had impressed them early on, not just in his off-field stuff. He proved a tremendous tourist in pulling players together, both seriously and as a bit of a comedian and joking, lighting it. They loved that. You know, it really helped the team come together before they left the UK as well as out there. But on the pitch, he impressed them. He impressed them in terms of understanding what he needed to do to beat the Springboks. And they had a particular game style that McGeechan had come up with and Telfer had come up with. Telfer wanted them. The South African pack was bigger than any pack they'd ever played against, taller as well. Os Durant there, big, huge tall front row. So they had a plan to get underneath them, and they said, we're not going to take them on physically. We're not going to stand up to them full pelt because they're strong, they're bigger. So we're going to go underneath them. We're going to go under them in the scrum, and we're going to play differently off the scrum. So we're going to move the ball quicker. Now, Doddie was a player who understood that, and he got that. He picked it up really quickly on that tour. And there were several other players who might have been shoe-ins or first choices who weren't getting that early on. And so there was I did Jim Telfer's book with him, and so I learned a lot from Jim about his thinking of things he'd never actually spoken about. But he said that there were a number of players in the running for that first test. Tom Smith, Paul Wallace went on and got it. I think Neil Back came in, who might not have been in the running at start, and Doddie was one of them. So that's actually the biggest frustration of the injury he got in that Lions tour, was that he was in line. He was shaping up. Nobody ever said it because you can't say it because it didn't come to the first test, but he was shaping up to be in the running to start the first test for the Lions. And as you say, Graham, I think that would have underlined the fact that he was a legendary player in rugby. He was actually a world-class player in rugby. And when the game went professional, it was interesting that Rob Andrew, the England standoff, who was given the keys to Newcastle by Sir John Hall, who was the Newcastle United owner. He went and bought the rugby club, Newcastle Gosforth, and said, "Okay, we're going to be at the front of this professional revolution and make sure Newcastle and North East are part of this." He turned to Doddie and Gary Armstrong as two Scots that Rob Andrew thought were linchpins to what Scotland were doing at the time, and he brought them down to Newcastle. That was huge, and that just underlined again, I think, that Doddie was better than he thought he was, and was actually a world-class talent as a player, no doubt about it.
As somebody who I always thought was quite a humble guy, he was given the OBE in 2019. Do you think that would have made him a bit, maybe not embarrassed, but do you think that was something he would have been expecting at all?
Certainly not anything he's expecting. No, I think it came out of the blue for him. And, but he'd just been Doddie. He just shrugged it off. On one hand, he would say to people, God knows why I've got that. It's a bit daft giving it to me. On the other hand, he'd say, well, there are some clowns that get these medals. There are some clowns that get MBEs and OBEs. And so if they're going to get it, you might as well give it to me.
You're not wrong, mate. You're not wrong.
No, there are. There's lots of these given to people just for doing the job, aren't they? And civil service and all the rest. And, and there's Prime Minister's cronies who always get it. And Doddie loved a laugh at that. And Doddie was quite a serious guy as well at times. He understood what was going on. He liked not to get involved in it publicly. He was very good at sidestepping controversy publicly, but privately he would give as good as he's got in what he thought about what was going on and people. But he would tend to just shrug and get on. He lived day to day, I think, Doddie, and he, I think he took the OBE, great, delighted. What he was very quick to do with it was to say, this isn't a reward for me or my rugby kit. This is about MND. This is a reward for all the people who don't get the headlines, don't get the publicity that I get because everyone wants to speak to me. But the likes of Jill Douglas, who has been the chief exec now of this charity for a number of years, the likes of Scott Hastings, Gary Armstrong, people that stay in the background but have done an awful lot of work in that for that charity. He was very quick to say this is for them, and everybody who's donated. That's what he said very quickly. Everybody who's given £1 to MND research, this is for you, and he meant that. And that was the thing with Doddie. He didn't say anything he didn't mean. Doddie meant it. Everything was from the heart, and I think that's why now we're seeing so many people, and it's amazed me, to be honest, how many people there are from other walks of life, not rugby, not even sport, and I've met a few in the last week, people I wouldn't have expected possibly to have known who Doddie was, so it's quite surprised me how far his name and what he's done has travelled across the world. Really. So, that's phenomenal for a big, skinny lad from the farm at Cottle Ferry near Stow, a Stow primary school lad who liked to make people laugh. Christ, he's done something special with his life.
He certainly has. Red Scotland says, I always thought Doddie Weir was among the strongest performers on the field, regardless of opposition. Gavin Hastings was another who never looked out of place, had big games of both of them. I can't disagree with any of that, to be honest. I think he's absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I think, sometimes, he had his other sides where he could be a lazy bugger as well. And, Jim Telfer says he was always a great trainer and worked hard for him on the field. I don't know if that's Jim's memory, because I've had teammates tell me he would pick and choose his moments sometimes in training when he felt he had something to go for, and other times when he'd prefer the jokes. But yeah, teammates, you don't find, I haven't found any teammates to say that he wasn't a phenomenal player to play alongside. And I think he had a real steely edge, which a lot of people didn't see. You never see that off the pitch. And I think it's a surprise probably for players, particularly opponents on the pitch, to meet the steely side of Doddie. And he had plenty of tricks to play on the pitch. He was not averse to a shirt pull here. He was famous for holding people down in the line out. He would talk to somebody to distract them. He had lots of great wiles that he had in the pitch to get round players that were proven difficult. And there's some great stories that people have of some of the things he got up to on the pitch, particularly playing the English Premiership against some of the top English teams, where he used all the experience he had to win games. And ultimately, he was a winner. Ultimately, You speak to Craig Chalmers, Brian Redpath, guys that achieved a lot in the game, and they say, he was a tremendous guy to take into battle because you knew he led from the front. He didn't back down. He didn't wait for things to happen. He went and made them happen. I would imagine it was great to watch, great to report on. I remember one time though, if it was great for having a great time with the journalists, and there's so many. It's been interesting seeing lots of journalists this week talking about how their greatest interviews were with Doddie, because they were always fun. Even recently, when I had MND, local journalist down here, was saying this week that Doddie said, "Okay, you're interviewing me about my fitness regime, so that's fine. You can come and do it, but I'm not going to sit down and talk to you. You've got to go on the treadmill beside me, and we've both got to run at the same pace, and you can interview me if you do that." And this chap was saying, who's got a bit of weight to carry, was saying, it's the only thing that would get me on a treadmill. And Doddie says, "Fine, you can interview me now." And he was famous. I remember once in South Africa, he wasn't happy with somebody who'd written something about him and somebody in the team. And it was a bit of a scathing article. It was a bit early in the tour. It was a bit harsh, perhaps, to have a go. The team were just finding their feet. And Doddie's way of dealing with that was not to ignore the journalist or whatever, but he came out with, when all the journalists were all sitting outside of a pool, outdoor pool. We're there in the middle of winter in South Africa. Nobody is in this pool. It's a freezing cold pool. We're just sitting outside waiting to go to a press conference. And he came over to the journalist and said, "Okay, I know what you've written. I see what you've written. We're not too delighted with it, but we understand you guys have got to be honest and you've got to tell it as you see. So it's quite simple. Either you swim length of the pool with your clothes on, or I'll put you in the pool and drag you from one end of the pool to the other. Quite easy, your choice." Now, in 6'7", Doddie is towering over you. We start off by laughing, going, "Oh yeah, Doddie, I don't think that's going to happen. Oh, he's not going for a swim in this weather." Blooming middle of, okay, it's South Africa, but it was still freezing. And he wasn't for moving away, and he was laughing and joking, but then he's going, "I'm not going till this is done. That's all you've got to do." And in fact, he said, "You can go and change, you can go put your shorts on, and you can swim, or else I'm going to take you in with your clothes on." And there's no way of getting out of it. So it was a little glimpse into how strong Doddie could be when he wanted something to happen. He decided there was going to be some retribution for this article, but that journalist had a great relationship with him. It went on, it developed after that. I remember Doddie once stealing somebody's laptop, hid away in another room, wrote the article, rewrote the report so that it had Doddie featuring almost in every paragraph, and Doddie Weir having had a great game. Press send, sent it off to the newspaper, and then gave the journalist his laptop back. He got up to a few things like that, but it was very hard not to like him. He did it in a way that, you knew he was serious about what he was doing, but he did lots of things like that actually endeared him to journalists. And that was one of the reasons, he wasn't daft. He knew that by being nice to people, by getting on with them, okay, you could have a laugh, you could take the mickey, but he was probably going to get a good press because he made an effort to get to know journalists. He made an effort to have a laugh with them. He made an effort to include us in things. Often in tours, Doddie would include you in drinks and games and stuff. And, at that time, covering Scotland and covering rugby was actually really good fun because of people like Doddie.
Yeah, honestly, these stories are brilliant. I love hearing all these kind of stories, and I think it was important that we gave this a lot more airtime than 5 or 10 minutes, because I think Doddie deserves more than 5 or 10 minutes. So it's honestly, hearing these stories is great. We've got about 50 minutes left, but on behalf of everyone here at the locker room, we just have to send our deepest condolences to his family. As I say, 52-year-old, 6 years battling M&D, but he was an absolute legend of the game, an absolute character. And it's going to be a sad loss to the game. There's no doubt about that. And just all the best to his family and friends as well, because it's always a very sad time. Have you got to shoot off, Dave? We've got 50 minutes left. Have you got to shoot off?
It's all right. I've got another 5-10 minutes, actually, Graham. You're fine if you want. If you need me, if you've got much to talk about, no problem.
Well, for everyone that watches this, normally we've got till 7 o'clock, so we're on for another 15 minutes. I'm going to go back to the football because I want to talk about something that came out earlier this week that I noticed. And it's my favourite subject, VAR, because the SFA Chief Executive, Ian Maxwell, has said that VAR is working, but he says there are concerns over speed and communication. Now, he said that, what's it I've got written down here? He disagrees with saying that fans don't think it's working. He says fans might complain about the time it takes and the communication at the stadium, but that's it. Now, I'm not going to lie, David. I am not a massive fan of VAR, and I completely disagree with Ian Maxwell. I don't think it is working. Now, I wrote the stat down that it came in the 22nd of October, and since it came in, there's been 30 games, and there's been 19 penalties awarded. Now, I said this to Dave last week and week before as well, that a lot of these penalties you go back on and say that they're not penalties, and the other ones that I think are penalties. For me, for Ian Maxwell to say that he thinks VAR is working, I completely disagree, and I think most fans would disagree.
I don't know. It'll be interesting. I mean, he's using a stat today that, if I'm right, I'm not got it in front of me, but he said that something like 90% of refereeing decisions were right. That referees were making. I think that the global stat is 91%. The Scottish referees were 90%. I find that hilarious for a start. But then he said that VAR has upgraded that to 98%. So when they've looked back on VAR, they've said they've got that, the decisions have been lifted to 98% right. I love to see what he says about the Keanu Bacchus. We talked about Bacchus earlier. I don't know if you some Min fans will remember this, but most other clubs probably won't. But we had a goal chalked off against Dundee United because Keanu Bacchus picked up the ball in his own half, about 30 yards from our goal, and he took off. And two players came in to close him down. Then a third came in from behind him. He managed to wriggle, great control, managed to wriggle between the two players and turned and came back past them to cross the halfway line, to then go free across the halfway, played through. I think he played another ball forward and then it came back, or he maybe beat another player. But from when he took off with the ball, it was 10 seconds before the ball then was played to Ayunga, who then scored in the goal. Great goal, great pass, good finish. It was called up. I was at the game. It was called up for VAR, going to a VAR check, and none of us could understand what it was because Ayunga wasn't offside. And then you saw it more on Sports Scene at night, and apparently a player went down injured. Now I did see a Dundee United player went down in a heap, but within about 3 seconds he was back up again, chasing Bacchus. At Sports Scene at night, it showed it where they stopped the freeze frame and Bacchus's finger, it looked like Bacchus's pinky, had caught as he was running, and as he turned, his pinky caught the eye of, I can't remember who it was, but somebody running behind him. I think it might have been, I don't know if it's Levitt or one of the United players. And that player went down. So he got caught in the eye by a pinky and he went down on the ground. And then he got up again, wiped his eye, got up and carried on with the attack. They pulled it back and disallowed the goal because VAR said that was a free kick that had happened from a player who had his back to the player. Bacchus didn't know what was going on behind him. He's running, he turns, his arms go into the air. Quite clearly, he doesn't know who's there, didn't know there's somebody there. And they pulled that back. And I remember thinking, if that's what VAR's doing, if that's going to come back and check instances 10 seconds before, I mean, it's just a joke. It's an absolute joke. Because that had nothing to do with the goal, nothing to do with the actual attack. Now, United fans could say, yeah, it did because it was a free kick, so he wouldn't have attacked. But I just thought, we're making a mockery now of the game if we're going to pull things back to something that happened in the other half that, quite clearly wasn't a free kick. But even when you watch it on VAR, even if you decide that it might be, you're saying, well, did it have any impact in what happened? Did it affect Dundee United, for something as soft as that? I mean, the VAR's supposed to be there, I understood, to show that some of the referees made an obvious mistake. Nine times out of 10, a referee will watch that happen and he'll not decide that would be a free kick. So how can VAR step in? Willie Collum, I think it was, who steps in and says, yeah, that's happening. And Willie's got a reputation for doing that as a fourth official. He steps in regularly as a fourth official. So it worries me a wee bit that what his role is as a VAR technician. He's sitting there. I think Willie likes to referee as a fourth official. I think he likes to referee as a VAR official. He sees his job as being telling the ref when he's wrong. Now that's a concern because it takes it away from the referee who's got a feel for what's happening on the pitch. I get concerned when fourth officials are making decisions. If you're sitting in a room in Glasgow watching video, you're making decisions on something when the referee has more of a feel on what's going on. That's a concern. On the other hand, Graham, I would say I don't really have a problem with VAR in itself if there's somebody that can help a ref see something he hasn't seen. So if there's something, it's been going on in rugby for years, 20 years of rugby, and they've played about with it, struggled with it to begin with, made mistakes, took too long, it was a real nuisance, and then they've just improved it. So it's just a word in the ear of the referee, have a look at this. You might want to look at this. There's something's happened that you've not seen. Fair enough. I think that's quite helpful. And it's only really in active scoring or whatever. But they've worked really hard to leave it up to the ref. You still get some people who say, I think you should look at it again. But the referees have spoken to each other in rugby to say it's still up to the ref on the ground. It doesn't matter whether he's less experienced than the VAR official. It doesn't matter. It's left to you to make a call. So we'll show you it, but it's left to you to make a call. I think one of the challenges we've got in football at the moment is you've got experienced officials who are doing the VAR duty, and the less experienced officials feel they have to then make the decision they're told to make. If you've gone to VAR, you've been told to look at something. And I think we've only had one or two refs that have not changed their decision after looking at VAR. That's a worry for me. If we let the referees deal with it, bring their attention to something that they may have missed, I don't really have a problem with that. And we probably will get decisions. But what I've seen so far, I'm concerned that it's not been used properly.
See, for me, and I've mentioned this to Michael and Dave, the biggest bugbear for me, and actually Red Scotland's mentioned the word here, he says, I think it's the inconsistencies which have caused the doubt with VAR. Now, the biggest bugbear for me, and I've said this to Michael and Dave, is the handball rule. Some referees seem to be giving penalties for handball that other referees aren't. So why are certain referees making different decisions that other referees aren't making in terms of the handball rule? Now, everyone knows that watches a show. I'm a Hearts fan. And I've said this again, the Celtic one at Tynecastle where Michael Smith handles the ball, that's a penalty. I had no doubt that was a penalty. But why the referee hasn't gone to the monitor or been asked to go and look at the monitor and say, that's a penalty, I don't understand it. And you look at the two penalties that Celtic have had given against them, I think it was Dundee United and potentially a few weeks ago as well, against Matt O'Reilly. I mean, the handball rule for me is very, very contentious, and different referees seem to be adopting different rules. And that's the bugbear that I've got.
Yeah. And I think we're probably, that's the thing. We think that VAR is going to come in and it's technology. So it's a computer. It's going to make things right. So we're going to get more consistency. And the reality, of course, is it's not the computer that makes the decision. It's still humans that make the decision. So it's still humans looking at look at the Japanese one in the World Cup yesterday. Is that ball over the line or is it not? I mean, that now you could argue actually against what I've just said, that that's a computer making that decision. It's drawn a line that has got from above that looks down and the ball looks like it's touching the line from above. When actually the ball itself has crossed the line and is off the pitch. But technically there's still a hint of it. That becomes a problem, and that leaves the door open to inconsistency. If you've got referees that are sitting in that box and they have a different opinion to another referee of what a handball is, then we're going to get inconsistency. It's one of the things I always had a problem with as a journalist, sports journalist, was why we weren't allowed to speak to referees and the referee bosses more often. Again, rugby, I'll use rugby as an example. It's funny. I used to be able to sit with referees after a game. I'd be able to go in and see a ref after a game in a rugby match and ask him, what was the yellow card for? What actually led up to that? Or what were you thinking? And refs had no, it was off the record. I don't quite know whether SIU knew I was doing that, but the referee said, David, we'd rather you came and spoke to us, whether it's in the dressing room or whether you wait for us after, because I'd rather explain what I was thinking, whether I got it right or wrong. I'd rather explain this is what was going through my head. This is what I saw. And that's why I gave it. And I think I'm right in law. You might say that I've seen it wrong. Fair enough. We do. As refs, sometimes you see it differently. You see it wrong. You don't, things are happening very quickly. And I found it really difficult then, really easy then to have sympathy with refs. And I found it easy to put things across. They'll make mistakes. Of course they will. But if they come out and explain what they're seeing, then it helps you, I think, understand. And I totally agree with you that the handballs that have been given in the last couple of months, all of a sudden, because VAR is in, then suddenly many more handballs are given in the box. That can't be right. referees were seeing these handballs before, and they were deciding the player could do nothing about that. The player didn't raise his arm in an unnatural position as part of his body, couldn't do anything about it. And then suddenly now we're seeing penalties being given left, right and centre because when a player can't get out of the way. I mean, St Mirren have had 2 or 3. Richard Tate had one against them, turning his body and it hit. We had one, quite a funny one, was it against Rangers? I can't remember, where Tanzer went. And what was bizarre, but again, it looks at it's how different humans interpret things. The sports scene at night, they're saying, well, it has to be. He's raised his arm into an unnatural position to stop that ball. But my interpretation of watching what Scott Tanzer did was he leant forward with his leg to stop the ball. And if you try and dive forward with your left leg, your right arm goes up because you're leaning as much. Yeah. So his right arm went up as he leant forward with his left leg to try and block that. And the ball came up and hit his arm that was in the air behind him. Now, you could say, okay, well, it stopped the ball coming at the box. Fair enough, it's a penalty. But you can't say that he did it deliberately, in my opinion, or it was deliberate. So, yeah, I would love the referees and the referee bosses, I'd love the referee supervisor to come out and say, this is what we're looking at, and clarify it. And it doesn't happen in football often enough. You don't see it, do we? They come out and say, okay, here's an explanation of the laws for people out there. I'd like to see him on your show. Get him on the locker, get one of them on and say, this is what we're looking at in a penalty for a penalty. This is what we're looking at for a handball, and get them explaining what they're seeing. I think that would help.
This is something that I quite like about rugby. Actually, I'll go back to rugby again. I know this will never happen in football, but what I like about rugby is the fact that the referees are mic'd up. You can hear what they're saying to players, and the players. I've mentioned this before as well. The players in rugby respect the referee. The referee's decision is final. You can do that with a football referee. I mean, I've seen this numerous times already. A referee will get a word in his ear, go look at the monitor. The referee goes and looks at the monitor. He comes back, and the players still complain. You don't get that. You don't get that in rugby. Once the referee makes his decision, it's final.
There's 2 things in rugby that have changed, that have made that happen. One, that there's been a rule that was in for a long time that the referee has got the sanction where he can move a player back 10 metres if a player's given him abuse. That's been there. That's there from school. You only have to have that experience that once as a schoolboy player, where you've been marched back 10 metres and all your team go, thanks very much, you bloody idiot. We've gone 10 metres back and now they're going to score a try. So you make sure you don't do it. So that's a good sanction. A bit difficult. Football has always argued we can't do that 10 yards back. But I don't know. I mean, it turns a situation that's non-threatening into a direct free kick somebody can score from. It can be interesting. That would stop things. The other thing is when they brought the microphones into rugby, quite quickly they realised that things were being picked up, and so players were all called in, and players have been told, and players are regularly warned, you cannot shout and swear around about the ref because it's been picked up by the mics. It's going to go out live on air, so you can't do that. And they've been told by Sky executives and others that if you do it, then we'll just not pay you any money anymore. We'll just not cover your games. Now, those conversations have actually happened between Sky executives and players and coaches. So when it's as brutal as that, then players get in line. Football, in my opinion, refuses to tackle it. There's a number of things that football turns its head away from and says we can't do anything about that. That's always been part of the game. Can't do that. And actually, it's a joke. It's a cop-out. Football could do something about that. The abuse that referees take, if it wanted to, it just doesn't. It refuses to, and I think that's it's shocking, to be honest, because it's poor role models for kids. It suggests to kids that that's the way you should act. If you're a great star, that's the way you should act on the pitch. And I've done my own myself as an administrator and as a coach. We've changed it in leagues I've been involved in where you issue yellow and red cards, and it does stops it pretty quickly. But football just shrugs and thinks, that's just part of our game, abuse, and accepts it. And it's not just on the pitch, not just referees, but other stuff as well. It could do a lot more to change it if it really wanted to.
Well, just about to finish, David, thank you very much for joining me for the last 45 minutes. It's been great having you on. I just want to ask you one very, very final quick question. As a St Mirren fan, do you think that St Mirren can finish top 6 this season? Or if they can't, what would be your hope for St Mirren for this season? Yeah,
they can finish top 6, definitely. We've had a strange run, form away from home. But there's nothing between the teams. I mean, even Hearts and Hibs, are struggling to to be consistent and find their form consistently. The fact that we've beaten Celtic, we've drawn with Rangers, we should have held on and beaten Rangers there. But at the same time, we lost 3-0 away at St Johnstone, and we lost to Ross County 3-2. So just as easy as me saying we can finish top 6, and I know we can, and we get all our players back and we keep them fit, we could even finish 4th or 5th, being amongst it with Hearts and Hibs. It's just as easy that we could be drawn into a blooming relegation fight if we don't pick up our form away from home and we don't convert chances. So we can. Listen, before we go, Graham, I just want to say to everybody, in fact, with Doddie Weir's stuff that's going on, people can take part. Doddie started a thing called Doddie Aid, which is anybody can get involved. Just look up Doddie Aid, go and find that on Google and join. Become a player for the North, the West, the South, the Excels, whatever. I'm in the South because that's where I am in Scotland. But sign up there. It'd be a great way to make it the biggest Doddie Aid ever after we've lost a big man himself. I'd encourage people to go and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't disagree anymore. It's a great cause. Doddie Weir was a fantastic character, great inspiration, such a sad loss. Thank you very much to David Ferguson and earlier on to David Smith for joining me. We will be back next Friday at 5 o'clock. As always, hopefully Michael McCune will be back, because hosting this show, when you've got to do a lot of prep, it's an absolute nightmare. But I do enjoy doing this. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you again to David Ferguson for joining me for this last 45 minutes. It's been great having you on to talk about the legend that is Doddie Weir. We are back next Friday from 5 o'clock. Thank you for all your comments and thank you for watching. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.